Here we go. So hi, Kev, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you going?
Tired and buggered. So I'm hoping that if I kind of lose my train of thought, you're going to pick up the slack.
You're cool.
So I'm just a bit buggered. So I wanted to bring you in because I'm working on a project. I'm looking at how you support transgender and LGB kids in school. And I'm looking at what are the risks around this space. And so I've had a look at all the different laws. I've gone it by state. At the moment, I'm focusing on Tasmania. And there's, as you would expect, a lot of concerns. The biggest concern, of course, that I've got is what is transgender? Because we know, historically speaking, that if you don't get actively involved in socially transitioning a young person, as in giving them pronouns and changing their uniforms and their names, etc., that they'll usually, once they go through puberty, and traditionally we're talking about transgenderism as a medical condition, that it usually resolves as someone who's gay, something like 75–80%, or they're autistic, or often we also have another group of really intelligent kids, and we have a group of kids who have been maltreated or come from a history of abuse that they've tried to escape their body. So traditionally it's been associated with body dysmorphia, as in a sense, or incongruence with the stereotypes of what you're supposed to be as a male or a female, has been that. Most recently, since about 2012, we've also had a change. Used to be primarily boys that had gender dysphoria, 0.01% or something. And now what we've got is most of the girls who transition, most of the kids who transition are girls. And we seem to be associating that with a social contagion or social influence. We know that if one kid trans in the school, then there's their little network of friends, you've got a higher probability that they were trans and stuff like that. So there's a whole lot of stats around that. But the major concern around the transgender stuff is this whole idea of gender identity, you know. And on one part, what we've found is I've just finished a whole bunch of work on gender affirming care. And what we found is that when different organizations that they went and did a systematic review of the evidence, which is something that is like you really get the nitty gritty. And how do they do their study? What was their rubrics? Did they have a control group? All the rest of it. What came out of it was one, gender affirming care, not a good idea. There's no such thing as gender identity. That's something that you can measure, can see, can test. There's no diagnostic tool. It's something purely subjective. And two, lots and lots of medical damages to the body if you go through with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgery and things like that. So that was so the major concern that I've seen in the schools is that you have something that's been in the medical space, a medical diagnostic, but now it's in the space of social gender identity. So it's a social thing. And you've got people who are not psychologists, psychiatrists, or psychotherapists who are deciding or assisting young people on whether or not they've got a gender identity. And of course, you've got a whole ecosystem and culture now that says there is such a thing as gender identity, where every systematic, scientific, material evidence-based research has shown there's no such thing. You can't find it. It's like a soul. It's like a soul.
Yeah, well, I'm not alone in it's really interesting. I'm not alone in older trans people or people that have been transitioned for a long time, because I'm not actually that old, that really have I have no idea what to do with gender identity. Like the idea of a gender identity, I still don't really, I don't know what to do with that. Like I don't fully understand it. It seems to turn into whatever people want it to be to win their point. Like
That's
it's
kind of
so
surprising,
elusive,
Kev.
it's slippery.
It's
Sorry.
surprising, Kev. That's kind of surprising, Kev, because you're supposed to be in that camp.
Yeah, but like I'm
And
not alone. Like
can
you
you
look
tell
at
everybody, a bit about yourself? Because you transitioned. When did you transition? How did you work your
to
transgender? What was the process? What happened? Why?
well, it's kind of long, and I was always very gender non-conforming, but I wasn't. Like, people think about gender non-conformity in the gender critical space, and they kind of look at people who are like mildly gender non-conforming but still kind of fit within their role and kind of go, well, that's not a problem, we can still get along fine. I was kind of right at the very extreme of that, where I would be mistaken for a boy frequently and often throughout childhood, which is really that uncommon. That happens to lots of kids, but it continued to happen all the way through my teens into my 20s. And the older I got, the more it became like it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I had like body dysmorphia or gender dysphoria in my body, in that I had bits of, like my breasts were just really, I could not compute, like I wasn't disassociated from them, I just ignored them because I couldn't, it was this weird, you can't really explain it in an adequate way to make people really comprehend. And I had a lot of people throughout, family members and family friends and things like that, that said to me throughout my life I should have been born a boy because my behavior and just everything about me was so far into the masculine realm that that was how they made sense of me externally as well. But it wasn't really something that I thought about because I'm also kind of pragmatic. So people would say you should have been born a boy, and my internal response would be, well, I wasn't, so why are we having this conversation? Like, it's irrelevant, it's never going to happen, like there's nothing I can do. So then I kind of, when I was like 15 or so, I realized I was attracted to women. And this is one of the things about this space at the moment with trans kids that is not really being discussed that much, is that and this is, I've spoken to a number of LGB people that have had this experience. As you kind of get into your teens and you start, your sexuality starts to kind of dawn on you,
Yeah.
my first response was, if I'm attracted to women, then maybe I should have been born a boy, like, oh, maybe I should have been a man. And it's not a realistic or practical kind of tangible thing where you're like, I'm gonna I'll start on that pathway tomorrow when I wake up first thing. It's not that kind of thing. It's just this weird, I feel this, I'm attracted to the same sex. So that means externally that I should be, because only men are attracted to women.
Yeah.
So if I'm attracted to women, that's incongruous and I can't get that to fit. And your first like your first instinct is, well, maybe there's a problem with me in, my sex body.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, that kind of goes away. And you realize, oh no, there's this thing, you can be a girl that is also attracted to girls, or you can be a boy that is also attracted to boys. And
When were you like it? 'Cause I grew up ages ago. Were were you surrounded with people who? When did you know there were lesbians? Like, when did you know that was an option?
um, I was a late bloomer, so I, my mother had a friend who had a lesbian friend that I interacted with when I was probably 11, 12. Pardon me. And she kind of sat us down before we went down and before we met this person, and was like, listen, there are people that have all sorts of different lifestyles that are different to yours. It's not, like, don't worry about it. It's a thing. It's not unusual. So it was kind of presented to me as very natural and normal. And I was a kid in the 80s, so there were gay things around. But I didn't really associate it with myself at that stage. It just kind of slowly, I was like 18, 17, 18 before it really started to kind of dawn on me that I was gay. Um, and then having gender confusion was what we called it in the 90s. In the 80s and the 90s, it was, you kind of went through this period of gender confusion,
Yeah.
where as your sexuality is slowly awakening, you kind of have this discombobulation of, well, only men are attracted to women, and only, you know, women are attracted to men. So if I'm a boy that's attracted to boys, then maybe I should have been a woman.
Yeah.
And that was really, really common. I remember having multiple conversations with other gay people about that in the 90s as we were coming out, which is also a factor that is being completely sidelined with the trans kids stuff as well. That is
I don't
really
think that's
concerning.
changed. I think that's pretty much,
Yeah, well,
it's not changed.
there are a lot of gay people talking about being gender dysphoric when when they were kids, and I kind of think maybe there's a bit of, some of it is obviously the case, like people that are, you know, obviously have resolved their gender dysphoria, and I think there are other people that are kind of revisiting their history or revising their history, and a bit in their gender confusion has become gender dysphoria over time because of the political urgency of what is happening. Um, but yeah, so I was kind of always very masculine and odd, and I didn't really fit. But my mother was very good at kind of ensuring that I was okay. She's
Yeah.
like, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being an excessively masculine girl. That's completely, you know, there's a bell curve of behaviors and all sorts of personalities, and you just happen to be right smack bam on the border. That's totally natural, normal, fine, nothing to see here, move along. Um,
Good mum.
so it kind of was a creeper for me, and then I bumped into a trans guy as I was coming out as a lesbian, but they didn't pass. He was like 5'1", really early in transition, so scraggly and weird looking. And I kind of was like, well, I don't really need to look any weirder than I already do. I stick out like a sore thumb everywhere I go. That's not a solution to my problem. And then there would be articles in Lesbians on the Loose. Maybe maybe once every 8 months or so for a couple of years, they would do women taking testosterone articles,
Yeah.
but they didn't ever really get to the point of you did this to transition or to masculinize, and they were pictures of women that already looked like I looked. So they'd
Didn't
be
they
on
just hand them out
testosterone.
at parties though at one stage? You know, you had
Sorry?
at one stage you had these salesmen going around to lesbian events handing out bloody testosterone.
Wow.
You know, try this, get on the T.
Wow. Yeah, they seemed really odd because it was like the early to mid 90s. It was really rare, these really random articles. But again, the women that were in the pictures looked exactly like I looked already. I was like,
Yeah.
I already look quite, like I'm reasonably tall for a female. So, like I'm 5'8". So I kind of,
Yeah.
not that super tall, but you know what I mean? I'm in the upper range. So yeah, like, and then I eventually bumped into a book of guys that had fully transitioned, or had not fully transitioned, but had taken testosterone. And there was something that just clicked instantaneously. And I knew I would pass. I knew I would more or less look like this. I knew that it would make my outward facing life somewhat more hassle-free day to day. It would kind of help me fit into my body a bit more. I
Yeah.
never really thought about it. I always presented it as like to family and friends and people. I always kind of said I was going to take testosterone, which would mean that I would transition into looking like a man. It was never I want to be a man. Like
Yeah.
I kind of definitely, it was very uncomfortable in the beginning because I definitely wanted that. Like I wanted facial hair etc. But I didn't. It felt very uncomfortable to say that I wanted it. Yeah, so it kind of took like it was a long period of probably like 15 years of, you know,
So when did you,
lesbians,
what
fun.
age did you transition then? What age when it,
Sorry.
what age then did you seriously go on the transition process? And how long did it,
I started testosterone when I was 26.
okay. So you're fully mature by then. You've got an adult brain pretty much by then.
Yeah.
Okay. With now, did you get any advice? Did you get any warnings of possible pitfalls or dangers or risks? Did you get a good 360 on what are the pros and cons?
Um, not in paper form, and it was 20 years, like more than 20 years ago, so it's kind of hard to remember. It was also a different time, so it was like I found out from a friend because a friend showed me the book and said he said he was going to transition, and in explaining that he was going to transition and what it meant for him,
Yeah,
I saw this book and realized that the two of us were having the same experience, but that we never spoke about it at all.
yeah,
So we kind of transitioned 3 months apart. Um, it was a very different time in that he had spent 5 years or more researching even just testosterone. He had been umming and ahhing about it for years and years and years. So I found out a lot of information from him. Um, and I remember thinking, well, if I do this and it doesn't work out, then, like I'm a lesbian, I'm a chef, I'm in the inner west of Sydney.
yeah,
All of my friends are kind of very, like arty intellectual types. It won't be a problem.
yeah,
If I look like a man and revert back, that's on me. If I do that, then that's my mistake. I found out from my friend that you had to go to a GP to get referred to the gender centre. So I did that in one visit.
yeah,
And then on my first visit to the gender centre, she offered me a referral to the endocrinologist at that point.
yeah,
She pushed back a little bit and kind of spat at me, like, oh, so you want to grow facial hair and back hair and ear hair. That's what you want. And that was too fast for me. So I kind of went a few times before I accepted the referral to the endo. And then when I got to the endo, he kind of said, listen, like, we can make you look like a man. We can't make you actually a man. Your biology you will always be female. That's never going to change. We can't do anything about that. He didn't say it was an experimental treatment, but the vibe was kind of there. Like it was very obviously, right out on the edge kind of stuff. And he said to me that they didn't know that it was a relatively new form of treatment and that they didn't know all of the medical outcomes at that time or even still at this point. And that there may be consequences for me taking testosterone that may develop, and i.e. that, like I would have to address those things and take responsibility for those things as I went along. But I already kind of knew that when before he told me, because it had been, it's kind of frenetic kind of period where it's all you think about. You're a bit obsessed. It's like suddenly, like a unicorn that you
yeah.
never imagined was going to happen. Like it kind of is a bit all consuming for a bit. It took me a few months, which is pretty fast, but I kind of remember thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, then I have to take responsibility. And, like I kind of accepted that as part of the factor. Um, so yeah, there were, and I didn't have to do any therapy until I get to chest surgery, like to the breast removal
Yeah.
was the first time where they were like, you must go and get signed off by a psych. But we did, group therapy. They started a trans guy transitioning group therapy session through the gender center at that time, because there were like about 8 of us at that point that were all circling
Yeah.
at the same time. And we discussed a lot of stuff because that lasted for
So
18 months.
question, like you're transitioning because it'll be easier to look like a man because it kind of makes everything fit. Did you being in Sydney in the inner west, you know, which is Sydney anyway is it's pretty LGBT friendly. Did you get any flack from family or friends or people at the work about about transitioning?
No, because I was kind of because I was it's hard to imagine and it's hard to explain, but because I was right at the edge of female masculinity,
Yeah.
it wasn't it helped in some ways. People were like, oh, you're easier to deal with now, you make more sense as a trans guy, because I've never presented myself as you know, I've never even said that I'm a man until, you know,
Yeah.
very recently, like living as a man, like that's not a phrase that I would ever even utter. um there was a bit of that because I was right on the edge. It kind of made more sense. Like me, I was my best friend from high school got married the year before I started transition, and she asked me to be her bridesmaid, which was humiliating. But me in a dress pre-transition was other people that didn't know me, that had never met, they were meeting me on the day as I'm bridesmaid, reacted to me like I was a man in a dress. They were really uncomfortable, like they stayed well away. I got very bad looks, like it was really socially awkward. So um when I transitioned 2001, 2002, it kind of was, as far as the official lesbian community was concerned,
Yeah.
you are no longer welcome. Don't call yourself a lesbian. You are no longer a lesbian. You are no longer welcome to come to events. It's women born women only. And if you're going to transition, then you're kind of a traitor. So no, 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 which kind of really sucked. But at the same time, they kind of had a point. So, you know, I was more concerned
You
from
know
a
why?
partner at that.
Because because biologically you're a woman. Well, because
Um,
it's like I met a lady and her daughter is a lesbian. I think I have to recall lesbian, or I'm not sure if she's transitioning or not. But she seemed to attract in the home a lot of a lot of young girls who were, because it's young, a lot of young girls now were lesbian.
yeah,
And so they're all entertaining the idea of transitioning, like all of them. She says she
yeah.
hasn't come across any young lesbian that isn't entertaining the idea of transitioning. And she said to one of them, why do you feel the need, this particular person, why do you feel the need to transition? Why can't you still remain a woman and just accept that there's a rich variety and diversity of people, ways of being a woman, and you're one of them? Because if you go over to the man's side, then we're less diverse and less rich for it. And that girl cried. That girl
Oh wow.
cried. Yeah, she did.
Yeah. See, I transitioned in a time where almost nobody was like, this was not the cool thing to do.
Yeah,
Like,
but this, I remember talking to a lesbian over in California, and she said there's no such thing as young lesbians here.
yeah, it's unfathomable. Like that it's
Well, here's the thing. So I want to bring this back to here. So for example, I'm going to share the screen with this work that I've been doing. Hold on, check. Share screen, just this screen 2. Can you see that?
I can indeed.
Okay, so what am I doing here? Yeah. So look, I was looking at their child safe program for schools and their transgender and LGB student policies, and the resource that they gave from the CFCA. I can't remember off the top of my head what that stands for. Something to do with Child, Family, Community Australia or something like that, I think. And here's the definitions that they gave for gay and lesbian. Gay, an individual who identifies as a man and is sexually and romantically attracted to other people who identify as men. The term gay can also be used in relation to women who are sexually and romantically attracted to other women. And lesbians is
let's play word salad. Like this stuff, I find it hard to formulate sentences because this just really revs me up. Like,
yeah, but so here what you to me that really is, that's just a trans a trans male or trans identifying female, and lesbian, this is just a trans identifying male, because that's literally what it is, an individual who identifies as a woman. You have to identify as a woman, it means you're not a woman, and romantically attracted to other people who identify. So when you look at that, if that automatically means, if that's the definition through all the schools, and this is a child safe program, that's part of 10 national, there's 10 national articles that they have to adhere to be child safe. You're automatically identifying all gay kids as transgender. Okay. Yeah. And given what I noticed when I went to the training and when I've looked at all the other companies that are training on how to support transgender and LGB kids, and by the way, all they mean is transgender and gender diverse, which is all the same thing, is that they're doing the training in conjunct with the trans activists. Okay. And with this case, I'm not going to go into the trans activist. It was a trans activist who we know of that groomed one of our friends' daughters that had gone through
hell and back,
and was autistic, and all that kind of typical scenario where you really needed to have time and space, and they just groomed them into a pathway that now has done them a lot of harm. They're in a really bad way, you know. So in the schools, that's what I'm noticing, is that their gender identity is automatically transing gay and lesbian kids. Now, by the way, I'm not saying, by the way, that all kids will come out through any kind of any good process as lesbian, gay, autistic, etc. Because traditionally, as far as I can see, you've always got a percentage that will come out transitioning and are okay with it and happy with it. What's your take on that?
It's too far. Like, it's just it's crazy too far. Like, I can rant for hours about this. There are gay kids, like, you're also the gay kids that are like, as their sexuality awakens, their first instinct is, I should be the other sex. If I am attracted to my same sex, then first port of call is always, without fail, I should be the opposite sex, which up until 5 minutes ago was never an option. Like, it took me until I was 26 to even realize that you could transition. I mean, for males, it was always a different thing, because there were always higher profile males that had transitioned into trans women. That were always, so they were kind of more aware. But the social taboo around the whole transsexual realm, transvestite realm, kind of weeded people out. Like, it kind of was so taboo that you kind of had to accept that you were the bottom of the totem to even you know what I mean? Like, it kind of worked through the community, like, in general, like, you know, not just the LGB community, but by and large society, so that you could do this and you would be okay. But like, there was no on-ramp. You had to sift through everything. It took a long time. You had to, you know what I mean? Like, it was its own thing. And that was kind of a good thing, because it was so difficult to access in terms of finding resource and taking time to get there, that people had to really think about it, and that they also had to think about what that meant socially before they got there. So if you've got a kid that's suddenly thinking, I should have been a boy because I am attracted to other girls, by the time they find transition, they've probably grown past that phase. Like, that takes a couple of months, maybe a couple of years to get through, and then they're okay with being gay. Like it just has created this on ramp, and you don't identify like the
And,
identify thing is crazy as well. Like
and
I don't.
I think that the trouble is, though, is that you've got other issues coming here. We know that LGB kids in schools are. When I was in New Zealand, to be honest, I didn't know that I was a lesbian. I found out that everybody else did, except me. I was too busy trying to survive. I was putting myself through school at 14, working at night, going through schools. I just had no time for anything but trying to survive and things like that. But I did ask all some old school friends, were you aware that I was a lesbian? And they said, oh, of course you were. You
Yeah.
couldn't have given a heads up.
Yeah, like
But it wasn't this was back in the 70s. It wasn't nobody cared, you know. Nobody really cared. They just saw you as
yeah,
you.
no one was really surprised because I came through. I was kind of in high school in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
No one was particularly surprised to find out post high school that I was, I was a lesbian. And then when they eventually found out I transitioned, they were kind of a little bit scandalized that it was possible um, to take testosterone and look like a
Yeah.
guy. But they weren't really surprised, you know what I mean? Once they got over the shock of it is physically possible to do this, they kind of were like, well, yeah, and you seem much happier in your skin and you're more
Yeah.
relaxed and you're you.
Yeah.
And it's weird, and I don't understand it, but I'm happy that you're happy kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like,
Yeah, that's what I get when we've got kids who are trans. I don't get a lot of them. And LGBT, nobody really cares. Nobody. So I haven't seen the being bullied every day scenario, the most marginalized scenario with any of the kids I've dealt with, or when I was in recruitment, and we've got, particularly in the tech space, when we get a lot of guys who want to transition. Now I know that we were concerned about it, like when I was dealing with HR and saying, look, this guy is going to be transitioning. How is it going to be in tech space? Because you assume that they're all Asperger kind of blokes, it can be very black and white, but
yeah,
not really. I mean, there's always a dickhead out of so many people. The majority of people, we didn't really run into it. And they never reported that happened either. So I
yeah,
always
I haven't.
wonder, where is all this major bullying and attack and all the rest of it when I'm missing it.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Are you
I've
getting
never.
it? Do you have your friends and things like that? Do they report that at all?
Uh No, I've never. I had one guy ask me if I was fitting in a really smart ass kind of way at the job that I transitioned in, which
Yeah.
was Australia Post. That was the only negative thing that ever happened to me. I have a friend who is in the military, who you think would be in all sorts of, having hassles all the time. He's had two people say impolite things to him. I had one of my first girlfriend's best friend was like a drag queen, transvestite kind of gay boy. Like he would get dressed up and go out. And he was 6 foot and
Yeah.
really quite large, kind of heavy set kind of guy. That really didn't. He looked nice, but he didn't pass. He would get harassed from time to time. Um, on a semi-regular basis, but not really regularly.
I mean, I went to a Reddit board, and on this Reddit board, they were talking about being in Sydney and what's like to be trans. And they said, on occasion, once we had this guy who was drunk early in the morning. It happened once,
Yeah,
but then
yeah.
none of the narrative was there.
No, it kind of is like it does happen, and it is ugly, and it can be quite scary when it does happen. Like
Yeah.
I have heard of instances where it happens and it can get ugly. Nothing very recently, but it really is more terrifying. The prospect that it might happen
Okay.
is kind of more terrifying than you know what I mean? Like, I remember being terrified that it was that, like, in transition, that I was kind of you feel like a sitting duck, you feel exposed a bit, like, it kind of would happen more for trans women than for trans guys,
Yeah, because I was
because they
going to
kind of
say most people, you mess up my head, to be honest, because I can't use the she pronoun with you. I just can't. I just see. Well, actually, no, you mess up my head because you're too good a guy. So that tell. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? That's a tell.
yeah.
Too
Well,
good at
I mean, the other a lot of it is kind of microaggressions. Like, people will be impolite, or they'll be like, even the most, like, even the, like, it takes, like, Posey Parker level turfy kind of, gusto, where you have been harassed over a period of time. Like, she's had the kitchen sink thrown at her in terms of
Yeah.
abuse multiple times. She has balls of steel. Like, she is like, a little firecracker.
Yeah.
That's very rare. Like, it's kind of that level, like, she could be like, if I interacted with her, I imagine she would have absolutely no problem at this point being absolutely rude to my face. And I kind of I can completely understand why that would be the case.
She wouldn't be,
But
by the way. I was
well,
actually quite impressed with her. She's quite a listener. She's a very
yeah,
unusual because she actually, when she talks to you, she really listens. She wouldn't care.
yeah.
Only
Well,
care.
I mean,
She only cares
I'm
about
going off her public facing rhetoric, which is often different than your private facing
yeah,
rhetoric.
I
But
think
you know
so.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that you would think, people often think that their next door neighbor, or the person that has the shop down the road that they frequent, people, like, when you transition, you kind of have this fear and expectation that people that see you transition are going to be really, like, they have the opportunity to be really rude to you, and that they're going to take it. But in reality, that very rarely happens. Like, most
Yeah.
people are very uncomfortable being impolite to people to their face. Like, there's the social contract thing that happens. So with a lot of, like, not to say it doesn't happen and that it can't be grotesque from time to time, that's definitely the case. You get, add alcohol and some young guys that are out on
Yeah.
town looking for trouble, you can find trouble very easily. But by and large, like, I haven't really heard of that many, like, well, any, maybe one or two really grotesque kind of experiences. But for the most part, it's just the fear that it's going to happen, which can be all consuming. But, at this point, like, the stuff that I see on Twitter of people complaining about misgendering this and misgendering, like, all, like,
Well, I,
sideways
I,
looks.
I wonder about that. Look, to be honest, what I find with
It's
this
mainly
generation, and I wonder if it's
microaggressions.
my age, because I'm not thinking this young generation, is that they have very little resilience. Their resilience level is really, really low.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I did get quite a lot of abuse for different reasons, mainly for race.
Mm,
What else? Actually, not a great deal because there's such a lot of people who were just really kind and they would stick up for you and things like that.
mm,
But I did get some of that kind of crap. But you kind of shook it off. You just, well, that guy's an asshole, and off you go. That
yeah.
is, but these ones, they make an art form out of being victims. It's
Mm,
it very much seems like this is a thing that you need to be. You need to be a victim to have attention, to be important, to matter, and all the rest of it. And the second thing is that um, yeah, it's cultivated by the generation above them. So I'm a boomer.
this is
So
my generation. I'm X.
yeah, you're X, but the generation after yours seems to have been really coddled.
Mm,
In my generation, you lived, you're 7 years old, you're out the door, you come
mm,
back about 4:30 or something like this during the holidays. No one knows where you are. You're up trees, you're hanging upside down at a high pine tree, having a ball of the time.
yeah.
You're putting rafts together and going down Manawatu River where it's white water, having a great
Yeah.
time, falling off, you know,
No, scared, not fearful of what might happen. That happens to other
not
people.
even thinking about it. near deaths on a fairly regular basis, not worried about it, going into empty houses because they might be haunted and stuff like that, having a great time, and that was and when you're hitting 16, everyone is just chomping at the bit to leave home, and you gather your mates together to get a flat together, and you've got nothing, and you're finding furniture to stick in the house and things like that, and you're just making do, and finding it hilarious. That's what I remember about that time. That doesn't seem to be this time. They don't seem to leave home to their 24, 25, if that. They seem to have a need more of technology or clothes or things are so important for their images, whereas we didn't care. So it's and there is a concern when I'm with the kids, they are so surrounded by the support network, the government support network, that treats them like they are marginalized and have all these problems, whereas I give them no sympathy whatsoever, none. I give them empathy, but my assumption is they're going to be fine. We're going to be successful. You're going to have a job better than the tech guys, blah, 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 things like that. So here's the concern I've got. So there's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, Kev, is to get a bit of feedback into some of the stuff that I'm studying. So I looked at the sex and gender stuff. And what I'm noticing first and foremost is that you've got this concept called mature minor that's come out of the medical space. And at the medical space, gender dysphoria is a medical condition. It's not an identity. It's a medical condition, okay? And you've got approaches either in the therapeutic model for gender dysphoria is either something based on ideology or it's based on evidence. If it's based on ideology, then they're telling the kids that they're telling everyone they need to affirm them straight away. They need to give them pronouns and change their names and change their clothing. And if they don't, they're going to kill themselves. And if they don't give them the pronouns, then that's going to increase the probability of killing themselves. And everyone has got to be celebrating. And everybody else, if a boy comes into the girls' changing room, the girls don't like it, too bad. Discomfort is not as important as safety. So the girls can be discomforted if their boys are coming in when they're menstruating, or they're staying at home actually because they're menstruating, stuff like that. It's too bad because the safety factor is more important than the discomfort. So you've got that happening, and particularly when we look at the definitions, that they're automatically taking kids at that critical stage where they are saying, maybe I should have been born a male if I'm attracted to girls, or a female, I'm attracted to boys and things like that. You're taking them there and you're concretizing a process when they're trying to discover and explore, and you're just saying, oh, this is it. And it makes them feel, I would think most people feel that, oh, we've got an answer. I was speaking to a mother with an older child who's autistic, and she said most of them are looking for a quick answer, a solution, because they don't want the stress of working out who they are. That all that work, the expectation is there's not going to be any work or stress or all the milieu of adolescence that everyone goes through, trying to sort out major stuff as you change from a child to
who you are.
So I couldn't find any so I definitely couldn't find any diagnostic tool or way of working it out. I certainly, from a medical perspective, I don't see why teachers should be the ones in any way or shape or form deciding this or supporting it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the two things. Firstly, they're not trained to do this. Like, teachers are not trained as medical doctors. There is no. I was listening to someone the other day. Yesterday, I stumbled across someone who was saying, similar to schizophrenia or autism, gender dysphoria is kind of like a syndrome, in that it is a number of different symptoms that add up to, actually having something, like making up gender dysphoria. Like, if you have said symptoms, and that kind of made sense to me. I haven't really thought about it long term yet, so I may change my mind about that, but it seems about right. There's no test that you can take. There's no blood test that you can take to say, yes, you have this, no, you don't. So you have people that aren't even medically trained involving themselves to be nice, which is you know, hugely problematic. Add on to the top of the fact that, you know, like your you know, pubescent period into your mid-20s is just a rapid fire change
Yeah.
period of time. The other thing that then, like, by being nice to these kids and solving their short-term discomfort in
Yeah.
here's the answer as to who you are, they're actually creating a longer-term problem in that, like, you see a lot of the girls that are transitioning and they idolize this idea of boyhood. They think they look at like Elliot Page for the moment, who is
Yeah.
still well within the, you know, for the first 5 years of taking testosterone, a female body just looks like a teenage boy. You
Yeah.
look really young, really cute, you know, everything's still kind of soft. There's no hardcore masculinity, but that's a window that closes very rapidly. Like, I have to trim my eyebrow hair, I get ear hairs, I have back hair, like, it goes on. You can't control how much you are going to transition. And then when you start to look like a man in society, like, you can't wear a shirt or have a tattoo that says that you're trans everywhere you go.
Yeah.
People start expecting you to be as an adult trans guy who is mistaken for a man in society. You're expected to be self-sufficient. You're expected to be resilient. You have other guys telling you that you got fat when you put on weight. They don't hold back, you know, like, so they're mollycoddling these people to say, "Oh, we'll solve your short-term angst by giving you this title, and then everything will live happily ever after." And you'll actually, you know, they seem to imply that your biology is changing if you change your birth certificate, even though you still have a uterus and, you know, your original plumbing.
Yeah.
Because in Australia, most people don't actually do the lower surgeries. Um, it's setting you up for a long-term trouble. Like, you once the party is over and the celebration and the streamers go away, you have to live with this day in, day out, day in, day out. And you have a lot of time to think about things, and you have people expecting behavior from you that, like, in order to one of the reasons that I transitioned was because I kind of, in some ways, even at age 26, 27, still hadn't really gone. It's weird, but you kind of go through these developmental stages of, you know, your first prom dress or something, where you kind of feel like you're becoming an adult throughout your adolescence. I didn't really have any of that because the uniforms didn't fit, which is not a reason to transition, but it was kind of like an extra thing. And part of transitioning for me was actually stepping into my adult life in a really, it was kind of a minor thing for me, but it was definitely there. Um, Taking responsibility for yourself and your actions, like the way that they are treating these, like, letting these kids transition throughout, you know, they're not setting it, they're setting them up for long-term problems all over the place. Like, the whole process is problematic from start to finish because no one's actually being real with these people about what is, you know,
Yeah.
what it looks like to be a 45, 46, 48-year-old trans guy whose hair is receding and who is out in the suburbs and is quietly living their life. Like,
Yeah. I like
you
when
know,
I was
like,
when I was thinking about it, okay, so I've got an issue the fact that the transgender identity is just being laid down automatically on autistic,
yeah,
gay kids and all the rest of it. And those who will probably be transgender, I'm not quite sure if that benefits them or not, because even then it's going to take away that process like that. I mean, when we're looking, I was thinking about, well, how do we support people? I was thinking the only thing you can do is just support gender nonconformity. How about making uniforms that people wear whatever uniform they want? They can
yeah,
play with it because that's what the age of adolescence is play with it.
yeah,
Play with having the different clothing. Why should it matter, really? Play with having the different clothing. Maybe get real, get rid of the trans activists who are pushing a particular agenda, but have different people maybe come in and just go through all the pros and cons and the bad and the good and things like that, and pictures and stuff like that. But the major concern I've got to say is I think there has to be a principle that no transgender or LGBTQ is more important than any other person in the school. I
No,
think that's a major thing. The girl shouldn't be
no,
discomforted, shouldn't have to feel like they are unsafe in toilets, shouldn't have their feelings dismissed because this boy takes priority over them. Certainly when it comes to sports, I know before 12 o'clock I was quite the tomboy, and I like beating up boys a lot, you know, as you do.
yeah,
It was fun, and guys like it, you know, because when you're growing up, boys like it. You like it when you tumble them over and you play sports and things like that. So it was a lot of fun, and I was the fastest runner and things like that. But once puberty hit, no, not anymore.
I've kind of flip-flopped on the sport thing. And I think community sports, LGB community sports, LGBT community sports are a different category altogether. And I'm happy to agree to disagree with people on that. But I kind of have come around to, I just think, no, like you're not being, but by being fair to one person, you're not being fair to all.
Yeah.
Like,
I dislike the idea of making a special class, which is the major issues I've got with diversity inclusion audits with ACON and Rainbow Tick, etc. Is you're putting one class of people up and above everyone else. And then I'm thinking about why you got this in corporate organizations, government organizations. What the hell has your sexuality got to do with your workplace? Unless you're a prostitute, you're not bonking there. I still can't figure that out. I mean, I can understand we don't have any bullying, but don't have any bullying at all to anyone. So
No,
I
it
really,
is. We're down to microaggressions. Like that, we're at a point in society where there is so little day to day. You know what I mean? Like there's so few big, systematic problems to solve. It's all down to the nitty gritty, which is why we're entertaining this, as far as I can see. It's
well, there are
you
some
know,
serious issues. I mean, we've still got children being
well,
taken
I mean,
away from their home within the WOP-WOPs. Any Aboriginal kid who's 5 years, girl who's 5 years old is going to be raped. We do have serious issues, but we're
yeah,
ignoring them. We're fixing up the silly fit fart things that we can fit fart over. You
yeah,
know, we're swallowing, what is it? We're swallowing a camel. Oh, I can't remember the phrase. You know, we're choking on a pea and swallowing a camel kind of thing, you know.
yeah,
So look, the other major issue that I've got is that the schools feel, and it's written down in some of their rules, that if they have more information on the child than the parent, then they can go ahead and transition them, and the parents are taken out of the loop. Now, I just find that disgusting on so many levels. One, because you're making a culture of deceit, and you're removing safeguarding, because what you're doing is you're saying, don't tell your parents that we're doing this. Let's keep it.
yeah, because that's not a safeguarding issue at all. Like hiding shit from people's parents. Like
No.
at the end of the day, I don't remember my third grade teacher's name,
Yeah.
but I see my mother on a regular basis. Like she knows me in some ways more than I know myself. And we may not agree on everything, and we may have had some really massive disagreements over our time, but
Yeah.
she cares about me more than anybody else on the
Yeah.
planet. You know, like the idea that it kind of, because there were, some rather severe abuses that happen around the fringes that kind of came into the light, like parents that are doing the wrong thing. We kind of need to safeguard for that. It's kind of turned into we need to safeguard parents entirely because there are a few bad apples in the bunch. And it's like, no, the family is the basis of
Yeah.
society. Like that is the most sound fundamental unit is workable in our society. Like, you know,
Well, okay. So
you
here's a
have to give
question.
the
Okay.
benefit of the doubt.
Supporting kids who may may end up being transgender, supporting kids with LGB, etc. What is the best way to support them?
I think the old way, personally. Like I think being a little bit more sympathetic, but saying, listen, when you okay, so there's a problem with trans women historically, so there'll be gay boys who figure out that they are gender dysphoric and they are they are on the feminine side in the same way that I was on the masculine side. But
Yeah,
for natal females, you can transition, like Buck transitioned at 30 and still looks completely like a dude. Like, so there's
yeah.
not really a time frame for females in the same way there is for males, which is kind of why this is like one of the driving factors of this. There have been historically like 15, 16, 17-year-old like proto gay boys that wanted to transition, that ran away from home, that got into sex work, that spent like a decade or 2 decades like drug dependent. There's a lot of, like suicidality or,
Yeah.
missing to murder and shit like that. Those kids will always exist, and I don't know what to do with them. But I kind of think until you get to, like 16, 17, it should be, you are a natural, normal, part of the bell curve. Your gender nonconformity is perfectly acceptable. Like, if because being an adult trans person actually requires a fair amount of resilience. So
Yeah.
letting people transition because that, they might faint otherwise is not really a great long-term solution, because it just moves the problem further down the road.
Well, on that, just on that point, with the kids that we do, with marginalised rest of it, we do put a focus on resilience training, because you can get resilience training,
Yeah,
meditation, so that you can step back from emotions. It's not
yeah,
that woo-woo meditation, they get into, but like more of ability to sort of pause and almost have yourself as an avatar and see what you're doing and what you're going through and that kind of thing. Found that to be highly useful for everyone, you know.
yeah.
That seemed to be supportive.
And like if kid like the idea that someone who is socially transitioning at school, or even medically transitioning in their late teens, going into the girls' toilets or the boys' toilets, like, no, that's not fair on the other kids
No,
who also have
that's the thing, because you're teaching them that you are above everybody else. So like when
yeah,
generally I would say, with parental notification, guaranteed, unless parents found unfit through formal proceedings with a child protective service, they need to know what's going on with the kid.
yeah,
And the other
yeah,
thing, from a medical point of view, if your kid thinks that they've got a gender identity, and we take it historically that this has been a medical condition, the school should be telling the parent, because they've got a medical condition rather than an identity at that stage. So them not doing that, and particularly if they're going to go ahead and socially transition, which is about 99% that they're going to go on a medical pathway. And recently when I'm looking at all the information coming out more than ever now in the last 2 years about the damages of puberty blockers, it's extreme. It's not, they've been focusing on the genitalia, but they haven't focused on the heart and the lungs and on the
I'll
whole
be
body.
worried about the brain.
All the organs are actually a stunt.
Paused.
And you're putting these, and you're having still one part of your body growing out of sync with the rest. It's just an I
It's
feel that the
travesty.
schools, if they go ahead with this, some way or somehow, we need to sue them. I really do. We
Yeah,
need
I'm
to.
really happy to hear about the insurance thing.
Same here. I'm very happy with the insurance thing, and I'm really interested in how do you make it so you can sue schools if they go ahead with this. I'm really serious. Like the
Yeah.
social approach. So the social approach for schools so far, what I've seen across their states is the schools affirm children's gender choice, changing names, pronouns, no other options are provided. That's it. It's a one size fits all, you know.
It
Whereas,
should be it should be therapy, lots of long term, like cool your jets, and if you're still like this in a couple of years, we'll start talking about it then. Like, it
yeah,
shouldn't be,
I'll
because
give you
you're
another one.
not setting kids up for long term adult, delaying gratification on any level.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Current practice with toilets and changing areas is they base it on gender identity. I say base it on biological sex, which is not.
Especially like I heard that, and then I was like, gee, you've got like boys that are identifying as girls going into girls' toilets in the middle of puberty, I can't imagine what could possibly go wrong in that scenario. And then a couple of weeks later, that there was like sexual abuse. There was a report of sexual abuse happening in a toilet in a school in America. Like
and the
whether
UK,
they identify or not, male puberty is a very powerful thing. Like I went through an approximation of it at age 26,
yeah,
or like more or less, like let's not be too more or less. And I at 26 had trouble dealing with it, like anger issues, like hyperdrive, like sexual appetite, just like, and I had the maturity and the, you know, like the time and the, you know, like was in a mature relationship at the time, and I barely coped with it. And we're expecting 14, 15-year-old kids
yeah,
who are not being not being taught any resilience training whatsoever, and just letting them go into, you know, they're being told that they're more important than anybody else,
yeah,
or they're more important than the girls, and
yeah,
then getting sent into intimate areas where the girls are. Like,
yeah.
that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Okay, sports participation. Current practice is based on gender identity. I say based on biological sex after age 10 or 11, probably.
Yeah.
What's your thought? Yeah. Now they've
Yeah,
got,
you know, and if you've got a kid that is, you know, like I hate this identifying nonsense, but you know, like separate them into you know, like every team sport there is has a skill base in a solo sport, you know, like get them into running or swimming or, you know, like rowing or, you know, whatever it will, like if there is an actual, like, if you have the unicorn of a trans kid in your school that hasn't transitioned, that is interested in sport, then funnel them into individual sports. Like they can compete in their own, you know, their own sex in an individual sport, because, you know, even if they transition later, team sports, like you're adding apples with oranges. Like it's not the same thing at all.
okay, area of breast, because this happens, they give out breast binders and tucking. Current
Yeah.
practice pretty much across Australia is no prohibition on staff providing. I couldn't help myself. I just said false understanding that there are safe ways to tuck or bind. I think that's actually
Yeah.
bullshit.
There
Do not do it.
there are
There's so many damages.
there are teachers.
Yeah. There, you know, it's like mine. I think it's I have to correct me if you're wrong, but -18 encourages schools to go and have the kids go and get binders, etc. But there's 5 major conditions underneath the binding that one or all of those 5 conditions are going to suffer. You know, not to mention that you can have serious situations where you're going to have dislocated ribs, and you're going to have back, but you're also going to have overheating and breathing. And you're supposed to be at school to learn. How do you do that when you're so discomforted?
Yeah.
You know, but the thing
Yeah,
is,
I did.
you know, things that gets me. I remember when I was growing up, and I learned that I was going to have breasts grow. I understand I went through a lot of homes, and so I didn't have much in the way of parental guidance and anything. And I thought, pragmatically speaking, that might be useful because I slept often on my front. And I thought the breast would lift me up and give me more airspace.
Like I wore a size too small sports bra because I wasn't
Yeah.
very big. And even that was like oppressive, you know,
Yeah.
halfway through the day. Like I can't I knew one guy that was transitioning that went a bit crazy, like he went a bit crazy with the binding, and I was just, like, he actually had sores where they would cut into him, and I was just like, what are you
Let,
doing?
let
Like,
me
no.
know. Let me tell you what you get as a pretty much sure. You're going to have about 97%. One of the studies I did, there's a number of them, the percentages change, but they're roughly the same. About 97% of respondents report at least one negative outcome from binding. Most common symptoms were back pain, about 50, a little bit more than 50%, overheating a little bit more than 50%, chest pain about 50%, shortness of breath, itching, bad posture, shoulder pain. And then there was really serious stuff that could happen, like rib fractures, rib or spine changes, shoulder joint dropping, muscle wasting, numbness, headache, fatigue, weakness, lightheadedness, dizziness, cough, respiratory infections, heartburn, abdominal pain, digestive issues, breast changes, breast tenderness, scarring, swelling, acne, skin changes, and skin infections. Now,
you know what's really funny?
well,
You know what the kicker for that is that if you wear, like, you don't even have to bind that tightly. You wear a t-shirt with a button-down shirt, nobody notices. I didn't have breast surgery until almost 18 months into transition. So I had facial hair and chest hair when
yeah,
I was getting surgery done.
that's gonna be
And I
weird,
was
look
going to
weird.
the gym
Kev,
6.
that would have looked weird.
Oh, well, you just look a bit pigeony, and you wear shirts that have stripes in the right place, like one stripe in the right place to kind of take people's eyes. Only one person ever looked at me strangely and was like, "What does that guy have? Why does that guy have pecs that size?" Like, they just don't, like, I have never soft packed either. Like, nobody notices. Nobody's looking at you that closely.
No, actually, most people are more concerned about themselves than anything else. Like, they really
Yes, that
want to
Eleanor Roosevelt quote.
but yeah,
People don't think about you nearly as often as you think they do.
yeah. Next area, gender dysphoria information packet. What they do is they usually across the board, they encourage people to get involved with people like -18. That's that organization that was co-founded by a child rapist, but hey,
Why not?
Trans Hub that encourages puberty blockers and misinforms exactly what it does. All those kind of guys usually engage in ideological based training with LGBTQI third parties. That's what they tend to look for. They say they encourage you to bring in those kind of organizations that are pushing. And they usually, when I looked at the organization, they've got most of my ILGA, most of my members of ILGA. That organization, just going to repeat, that was chucked out of lost its UN's ECOSOC status, ability to comment or give advice to UN because of ties to High Information Exchange and North American Man Boy Love Association, and still are affiliated with that. People get upset when I speak about the pedophilia, but that's pedophilia is so rampant. The more you learn about, the more rampant it is. I would say recommend objective scientific information to assist parents in choosing approach to support their children. But I would also say, like anything else, meet up with a diversity of people, like a diversity of people, old trannies, things like that. As many, usually when you profile markets, you can find market segments. Do the same in the space and let people go for the whole gamut for everybody, so that you've got.
And they shouldn't be giving medical information to children without parents' consent.
Yeah.
I saw one bit of it where it's like, test out to make, rather than assuming that the parents are going to be negative, which is highly unlikely, test the parents to see where they're at. Like, actually go and investigate with, like, politely, take the parents' temperature, see where they're at. But you shouldn't be offering, medical information to children without their parents' consent.
Well, what about that other sort of parents? Like, they found out that the parents who are pushing this trans stuff when their kids are 2 years old, because someone picks up the wrong toy, that half of them have got some kind of psychopathy, sociopathy, or something like that. They're very narcissistic and things like that. And then you do have a number of people, very much like Iran, the policies on Iran, where they don't want to have a homosexual, particularly they don't want a boy that's a girl, and then they'd rather have a daughter than a boy like that, particularly when it's in a culture that's celebrated. So you've got that as well, I think that's why it's important to have a diversity. I mean, one of the big problems I've got with the whole transgenderism, not trans people, but the trans movement, is that people aren't allowed to see people like themselves. Lesbians aren't allowed to see lesbians anymore. They've got to go the trans way. They're not allowed to see. I was listening to a really good podcast from Jen Speck on their last conference. It's excellent. It's one of the best podcasts I've seen for a while. And it really was interesting because I think it was Malcolm Clark who was speaking. He's bloody huge. He's like 6'4". And he was telling us that when he was about 12, he was this skinny little small campy guy. I can't imagine. Always played with the girls and all the rest of it. And then puberty hit and suddenly you couldn't really go at him because it's like kind of 6'4".
Yeah.
You know, last one is scientific basis, and and they've got current practice, no research cited at all. It's all emotional. It's really emotional. It's people coming in and talking like that person I told you about. No research cited, gender dysphoria or social contagion usually not mentioned at all. I can't find anything from any of the documentation. I'll keep looking, but I can't find it.
No, you won't find it. They wouldn't. No, they won't put that.
I can't find it all. So my recommendation is research grant citations. Do the research citations that talk about the whole picture, social contagion, social influence. And this is not to say that you're going absolutely no this or that, because I don't think it's that hard and dry. I think my approach would be, my approach in this article is take an individual-centered approach. Don't take a one-size-fits-all, which is very much what you do when you're doing product marketing. When you're doing product marketing, you want a one-size-fits-all. So I think I'm going to finish this up because we've been talking for a while. But what I did, can I make this bigger? And I will 200%. Let's see if that works. That might do it. Maybe a little bit less. 1 second. Excuse me. That should work. Let's do this. I'm going to just share something. Let's see if this is useful. Get your feedback on it. I think it's showing now.
Yeah,
so roughly, just for the sake of having a model, and the rule of thumb in testing with models is models are useful, but they're fallible, but they're useful, you know, as long as you don't believe everything. So I would basically center the two approaches. In the schools are pretty much taking a gender identity affirmation approach, and all the associated beliefs and perspectives are all based on ideology, gender identity or queer ideology.
Yeah.
Also seen because of the hypersexualization at the moment in defense of children, we're collecting, actually I've got you on that job, looking at those files, but we've actually got stuff from other places that talk a lot about the hypersexualization or the examples of hypersexualized school curricula. But literally on this side, they say people can literally be born in the wrong body, gender is innate and sex is socially constructed. Gender is more important than sex in all instances. Gender is determined by feelings and doesn't require verification by science. Right should be determined by gender identity. Social, medical, surgical alignment is an unquestionable human right and essential for individuals of all ages if desired. And people of all ages can never be incorrect about their gendered identity, even when it changes.
Shame about those detransitioners.
And disagreement with these beliefs is bigoted, phobic, and abusive and constitutes actual violence. Broadly based thinking. What do you think about that summation?
I like your column better than that column. What can I say? Like it's such an individualistic, like it's such a subtle nuance. Like just because you have gender dysphoria doesn't mean that you can never get over it. Doesn't mean that you can't learn to live and cope with your dysphoria and manage it. Like it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
It doesn't benefit everybody to transition. Like it's a huge extreme thing to do, and they're marketing it like it's a can of Coke.
Yeah, they are. Actually, it's more of a subscription model rather than a can of Coke. Like you're subscribing to subscription models, but you buy a can of Coke every now and then, but you're signed up to a subscription, like your Microsoft subscription or stuff like that. So on this side, what I've got, I think this is a more sensible approach, is individually centered and an emphasis on biology and material evidence. Some people believe that you can literally be born into the wrong body. I think that's true. All individuals have a right to have differing beliefs, but not all beliefs are true, correct, or helpful. By the way, I'm just going to give a heads up. I got most of the stuff from a person that I'm calling Nancy Wake. She's a psychologist, but she's not allowed to show that she's gender critical because a lot of ideas come from her. Most ideas come from her. Transgender identities may reflect an underlying mental illness, mental health condition. Both sex and gender are both important. Individual context will determine which is more important.
Yep.
Rights may reflect both sex and gender, but when in conflict, sex takes priority as a biological entity with the most robust evidence base.
Yeah.
Okay. Social, medical, surgical interventions may be helpful and appropriate for some individuals, but developmental ability, mental health, and other relevant issues must be factored into decision-making.
Yeah, bingo.
Okay. Beliefs often change, particularly with age, including about gendered identity. So caution should be given to all forms of transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Multiple factors contribute to gendered identity, just like all other identities.
Yep.
And disagreement and debate is necessary to advance knowledge.
Yeah.
Go with that?
You don't grow without pushback.
Yeah. And yeah, opposition in all things. You got to really check it out.
Yeah.
All righty. That's been helpful, Kev. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being on. I'll probably bring you back because I've got lots of stuff I'm going through, and there's not an area that it's an area I hate the fact of this this binary they them approach to everything, that they want to bring you into a they them approach, not like they them non-binary, but like you and us. Surely we can just put some hands across the aisles and just talk and sort things out so that individually everybody is kind of catered to because they're individual.
Because really, at the end of the day, it's not that hard. Like, there are a few sticking points that may be a bit tricky to nut out on a societal level, but it's not that hard.
No, it's not hard. It's common sense, I think, most of that.
Yeah,
so guys, thanks for watching. If you're watching, and go to indefenseofchildren.org, and which is talking about the pipelining of kids through to the gender clinics, through schools, and aww.org.au, which is mainly focused on the medicalization of children. Okay. Cheers. Thank you.